So in today's lecture, we're going to talk about cellular respiration. Okay, so cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is how your cells produce energy. Okay, it's all about producing the energy through your cells. Okay, so just like the power plant that turns fuel into the electricity, you know the power plants, right? So the plants, they turn the fuel into the electricity. So in your body, you have a glucose, sugar is the fuel, okay? And the electricity is in the form of ATP. We call it adenosine triphosphate, okay? So you have a glucose, which is fuel, and the electricity it's in the form of ATP in your body, okay? ATP is the main energy currency of the cell, okay? So what is ATP? So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so it's the molecule that stores and provides energy for the most activities in your body. So it's going to provide and store what energy to the most activities in your body always. Okay, so why it's important? Think of ATP like a charged battery. Okay, it's like a charged battery. I don't have the batteries now, so imagine this is the battery. So if it's fully charged, that means if it's full, it's called ATP in your body. Okay, so ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So the molecule of the ATP you can see here, it's made of one adenine, it's made of one ribose sugar, it's made of three phosphate groups always. Okay, so ATP, a charged battery. When your body needs energy, for example, to contract the muscle, to pump the blood, to send the nerve signals, it always uses the ATP molecule. Okay, so ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So what's the meaning of adenosine? The meaning of the adenosine is adenine with the ribose sugar. Okay, in the structure of ATP, you have one adenine molecule, which is nitrogenous base, and you have one ribose sugar. Okay, together they called adenosine, and three phosphate groups, as you can see here. First phosphate, second phosphate, and the third phosphate. Okay, in the bonds between these phosphate groups, in the bonds between them, they have the energy, they store the energy. Okay, they store the energy. So when you break down, when you remove one phosphate, the energy in the bonds of that phosphate is going to release. This energy is going to release outside. Okay, so structure of the ATP made of three parts, adenine, ribose, and three phosphate groups. The energy is stored in the bonds between the phosphate groups. Okay, between the phosphate groups, they have the bonds, and the energy is stored there. Especially the bond is more between the second and the third phosphate. If I count it correctly, that will be first, second, and the third. And the most energy is located between the second and between the third phosphate molecule. Okay, always. For example, in the skeletal muscle cells, the ATP helps detach myosin heads from the actin after contraction. Okay, in the skeletal muscles, so we will cover the musculoskeletal system very soon. So we have the special proteins there, which is called actin and myosin. So ATP helps to detach the myosin heads from the actin after the contraction. If the ATP is absent, muscles stay contracted all the time. Okay, which is seen in the rigor mortis after death, when a patient dies, they will be very hard. When you touch, it will be really hard. Why? Because the muscles are contracted. Why they are muscles contracted? Because there is no ATP. Why we need the ATP? We need the ATP for muscle relaxation. Okay, so that's why it's very crucial. So you're relaxing your muscles, you're contracting your muscles, right, all the time. So that means the ATP, you have the ATP. If you don't have the ATP, when a person dies, it will be very rigid, very hard to touch. If you touch, the muscles will be very hard. That's because there is no ATP to relax the muscles. Okay, there is no ATP to detach the myosin heads from the actin after the contraction. Okay, that's why it's important. How the process of releasing energy is happening. We call this process hydrolysis process, okay? This process is called hydrolysis. As you can see here from this ATP molecule, if I remove one phosphate molecule, what's going to happen in this process? The energy is going to release. So this process releases energy. Okay, this process always releases energy. But which process I need here to release the energy? What kind of process I need? I need the hydrolysis. I need water here. Okay, so hydrolysis means breaking a bond using the water molecules. Okay, the bond between the second and the third phosphate, here you can see that the bond between the second and the third phosphate is broken down with what? It's broken down with water. Okay, so this then releases the energy that the cell uses. So in order to break down the bond, we need the water molecules, which does the hydrolysis process. Okay, so with the way of hydrolysis, we are breaking down the bond between the second and the third phosphate molecules, and the energy is releasing here, is going out. Okay, so the result is ATP becoming ADP. Okay, if you remove one phosphate outside, when phosphate is removed outside, so what's going to happen? ATP becomes ADP. Okay, what's the meaning of ADP? The meaning of the ADP is adenosine diphosphate. Adenosine diphosphate. Okay, never ever forget. So, and a free molecule, a free phosphate is going to come out as well, always. Okay, any questions so far? When it becomes ADP, the energy is released. Always the energy is released. Okay. Any questions? In the kidneys, for example, in the kidneys, ATP, we have special ATP powers. So ATP powers the active transport of the sodium ions during the urine formation. Without the ATP, the filtration and reabsorption would fail, which leads to the electrolyte imbalance. Okay, so you have the kidneys, so we will cover it soon. In the kidneys, ATP powers the active transport. There is an active transport in the kidney, especially in the nephrons. Okay, in the nephrons, this is the functional unit of the kidneys. So there is an active transport of the sodium ions during the urine formation. So without the ATP molecules, without using this ATP, filtration processes and the reabsorption processes would fail in the kidneys, which leads to the electrolyte imbalances there. Okay, so what happens after ATP is used? When you remove, what happens when your ATP is used? It becomes ATP. What happens if you use this ATP as well? What happens if you use the second phosphate? You use it the first. If you use the second phosphate as well, so you will leave with AMP. AMP means adenosine monophosphate. So 3-phosphate, it means 3-phosphate you have. D-phosphate, it means 2-phosphate you have. Monophosphate, mono means 1, monophosphate you have. Okay, so ATP, when you use it as an energy, it becomes ATP. When you continue using the energy, it becomes AMP. Okay, so never forget this. So what happens after ATP is used in this diagram? As you can see, ATP used and became the ADP molecule, which has the 2 phosphates. But here is the cool part. ADP can be recharged back to the ATP. It can be recharged back to the ATP, but how? By adding a phosphate back with the cellular respiration in the mitochondria, okay? Like the recharging the battery, okay? So you're going to add the phosphate back and you're going to make the ATP again in the mitochondria with the cellular respiration, okay? In this process, when you make ATP from the ATP molecule, you're going to release the water molecule outside. And this process, of course, requires the energy. This process requires the energy. And the water is released. When the water is released, we together learned in the biomolecular reaction, this process is called dehydration synthesis reaction. Okay, dehydration synthesis reaction. So any questions so far? So, for example, in the cardiac cells, you have the heart, right? In the heart, you have the cardiac cells. In those cardiac cells, the mitochondria, they're abundant to quickly regenerate ATP to keep your heart beating non-stop, okay? They're going to regenerate ATP again and again and again very fast, okay? So why all of these important? Why this is so important? So this is very important. ATP is essential for your muscle contraction. So without ATP, you cannot contract, you cannot relax your muscles. So nerve impulse transmission. So without the ATP, without using the active transport, you cannot uh, transmit the nerve impulses. Okay, so active transporting of the ions as well. So you cannot use it. So without the ATP, you cannot do the protein synthesis. You cannot make the proteins and DNAs. Okay, for the healing and for the cell division, everywhere you need ATP molecules. In diseases, for example, like mitochondrial myopathies, that means defective mitochondria cannot produce enough ATP, and the patients have the muscle weakness, they have the fatigue and the oral dysfunction. They cannot, and organ dysfunction. So that means without ATP, organs will fail. Okay. So we have special disorders like this. So, for example, neurons and sodium potassium pumps, here the ATP is required for the firing of the nerve signals. Okay, for the muscle contractions, ATP detaches the myosin from the actin. It's very important. And also ATP pumps ions to form the urine. They're going to um, um, play a crucial role in the absorption processes of the ions. Okay, in the heart cells also you need the ATP, high ATP need for the non-stop contractions. Okay, so we have special disorders which are called mitochondrial disorders. They lack the ATP, which leads to the muscle weakness. Okay, so this is all about the energy sources. So where the cell gets its ATP. So step one is glucose. You're consuming the glucose always. This is the molecule of the glucose. As you can see, this molecule of glucose is the main sugar your body uses for the energy purposes. When a patient receives an IV with dextrose, you know what's dextrose? When you inject capillary, when they do the injection IV fluid with dextrose, dextrose is a form of the glucose. It's too quickly in order to quickly rise the blood sugar and provide instant ATP for organs like the brain and the heart. Okay, they always use it. Source of the glucose is a lot. For example, you can get the glucose from the foods, for example, from the bread. You can get it from the rice. You can get it from the fruits as well. Okay, or you can get it from the glycogen, which is stored in your livers and the muscles. Okay, this is the liver. In your livers, you store the glycogen, and in the muscles, you also store the glycogen molecules, so you can use them also. Okay, there are a lot of sources. And then what you're going to do with this glycogen, this is a stored form of the glucose. This is the type of the biomolecule which enters to the carbohydrates, specifically to the polysaccharides. Okay, and polysaccharide means it has a lot of monosaccharides inside, which in case of the glycogen, which is polysaccharide inside, it stores a lot of glucose molecules. Okay, so uh, when we need when we need the glucose, the glycogen is like a saving account of the glucose which is stored in the liver and in the muscle cells. Okay, so when our body needs the glucose molecule, so it's broken down into glucose. The glycogen will be broken down into glucose with a special hormone which is called glucagon. Okay, we will cover it during the digestive system. For example, in the hypoglycemia, you know about the hypoglycemia, hypoglycemia. Liver glycogen breaks down to release the glucose and maintain the blood sugar, especially which is critical for the brain function. So the most glucose is consumed by always by your liver cells, okay? So this is important. So after that, we are breaking down the glycogen, or we are getting the sources of the glucose from somewhere. After that, we are releasing the glucose. So what? So this, and then the cellular respiration starts. So this glucose plus oxygen, you see this formula. So we, after obtaining the glucose molecules, this glucose goes to the reaction with oxygen. Oxygen, it forms the carbon dioxide and water. This is the chemical equation of this. So glucose plus oxygen, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. Oxygen comes from where? It's coming from the breathing. Okay, and carbon dioxide is exhaled. Okay, you're going to exhale the carbon dioxide. You're going to inhale the oxygen in this process. Okay, for example, in asthma, you heard about the asthmatic patients, right? Asthma. So reduced oxygen delivery leads to the less ATP in the asthma that causes the muscle fatigue or confusions due to the low energy supply to the tissues. Okay, this leads to the muscle fatigue and the confusions. Okay. So what's next? What's next? This is where the ATP is made in the mitochondria, which is called the mitochondrion, okay? So this glucose molecule then enters to the mitochondria, okay? It's broken down in a multi-step processes. We call it glycolysis. Glycolysis. After glycolysis starts the Krebs cycle. After the Krebs cycle starts the electron transport chain. And the final result is a lot of ATP molecules. So in today's lecture, we will cover all of them, okay? So in the mitochondrial disorders, you know what's mitochondria, right? Mitochondria is special organoid which is located inside of the cell to make ATP. In the mitochondrial disorders, the mitochondria are defective. This causes the chronic fatigue, muscle weaknesses, and organ damages due to the ATP shortage because the ATP is not made enough, okay? So what we need also, we need the electron carriers for this process. What is electron carrier? So these molecules, like a bus, they after the breaking down of the glucose, a lot of electrons are released outside. Okay, so we need special buses, we need special transporters which transport these electrons and to use them efficiently. For example, I know two kinds of these buses, which electron carriers, okay? Those are electron carriers. I know two types of the electron carriers. The first electron carrier is NADH. The second electron carrier is FADH2. Okay, so NADH becomes NAD plus becomes NADH, FAD becomes FADH2. They carry the high energy electrons to the electron transport chain, which is the last portion, which is the last step of the cellular respiration, where they make from those electrons the ATP. Okay, so we will talk about the electron carriers very soon more. Okay, for example, in the niacin, you know what's niacin? This is the vitamin B3 deficiency. In the niacin, the NAD plus levels, they're going to drop. Okay, when the NAD plus drops, this blocks the ATP production. Okay, the less ATP is made or no ATP is made, this leads to the pellagra. Pellagra, this is the medical condition which follows the dermatitis. Okay, because of lacking of the ATP in the skin, it leads to the dermatitis. Lacking of the ATP in the digestive system leads to the diarrhea. Lacking of the ATP in the brain leads to the dementia. Okay, dementia, this is loss of memory. So this is all about this slide. So what you should know about the steps. First, you need the fuel. Body gets the glucose. Okay, and then we can also get the glucose from many sources. We can get glucose from stored versions. For example, we can get from the glycogen. Okay, this glucose molecule then goes to the reaction with the oxygen, okay, and makes a lot of ATP, okay. In the mitochondria, the powerhouse, that mitochondria makes more ATP then. And we have special helpers, which we call NAD plus or FAD, which carry the electrons, okay. So this is important. If any questions so far?
No, answer.
Okay. So let's continue then about electron carriers. So electron carriers, what are they? So during the cellular respiration, this breakdown of the glucose, we get a lot of electrons, and these electrons, they hold the potential energy always, okay? Not kinetic, but they hold the potential energy. But electrons cannot just float around the cell. They cannot just float around the cell. If they float, they are very toxic. They are oxidants, okay? They are very dangerous. Free electrons are always dangerous to your body. They should go somewhere. They should enter somewhere, okay? They need someone, those electrons need someone to carry them to the place where the ATP is made. Their function is to make ATP, but they're going to wait someone, okay, to carry them to the place where the ATP is made. Okay, that's the job of electron carriers. They're like buses, okay? They're like empty taxis, okay? Empty taxis that go around collecting the energy, okay? They're like taxis in the city, okay? So we have two types of the taxis or buses. The first is NAD plus, okay? The first electron carrier. Imagine the electron carrier is like this. This is a transporter. It has the wheels. Imagine they have the wheels, okay? Imagine. So this is just the illustration. And this is, imagine this is NADH, okay? This is NADH. So this is FADH, okay? This is NADH and then FADH. So NAD plus. So NAD plus. So you know what's plus? NAD. The full name of NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. You don't have to know the full name. The empty form. When the taxi, you know two versions of the taxi, right? They can be full. They can be empty. Okay. The empty form of the taxi will be NAD plus. Okay. So NAD plus, this is the empty form of the taxi. Okay, this is the empty form. It doesn't have any electrons yet. It haven't picked up any electrons yet. Okay, so when the NAD plus or F, and the second version of the taxi is FAD. Okay, it's FAD. So it is another type of the taxi. So this is FAD. So meaning of it is flavin. F means flavin, adenine dinucleotide. Okay. NAD means nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Okay. The full form, when it gets two electrons, when NAD gets two electrons, okay, I'm going to draw the electron. When it gets two electrons and when it gets protons, okay, protons, when they get the proton, it becomes what? It becomes NADH after getting protons and electrons. It's the full version. This is the full version. This is the empty version. Okay. This is also empty version. This is full version. Okay, it is full version. So when NAD plus or FAD, they accept electrons, we say that it's reduced. Okay, you know the oxidation reduction processes, right? When NAD plus, when empty state, when it gets electrons to itself, we say it became oxidized. So this is the it became the reduced, I'm sorry. When empty electron carrier, when it accepts two electrons with protons, what's going to happen? It's going to be reduced. By getting everything, it's going to be reduced. Okay, this is the reduced state. This is reduced. But when it gives off electrons, when the electron and the hydrogen has given off, when it gives off, it becomes again empty state, which is NAD plus state. Okay, so same with FAD. When FAD, this is the empty electron carrier. When it accepts two electrons with two protons, we call it protons, it becomes reduced. Okay, this is the reduced form. But when we leave two electrons and two protons outside, when it gives off them, it becomes again oxidized. Okay, this version is called oxidized. Okay, but this version also oxidized version. Okay. When it gets electrons, it is reduced. When it gives off, that means it is oxidized. Okay, when they drop off those electrons later at the mitochondria in the electron transport chain, they're going to give off these electrons. They become oxidized again, and they again get these electrons, and this cycle always continues. Okay, why these electron carriers so important, why I'm explaining you it so much, why they are important. They don't make ATP directly, okay, they're not going to make the ATP directly, but they deliver those electrons to the last part of the cellular respiration, which is called electron transport chain in the mitochondria, where lots of ATP is made. Okay, so let's talk about the medical examples. Why we are learning? I love giving medical examples while explaining. For example, when someone has vitamin B3 deficiency, vitamin B3, you know the vitamins, right? Especially the B3, vitamin B3 deficiency. When in your body you have less vitamin B3, what's going to happen? Or vitamin B2, vitamin B2 deficiency, what's going to happen? NAD levels and FAD levels will drop. Okay, when you have less B3 or B2, your NAD levels drop, your FAD levels, they are going to drop. Okay, without those electron carriers, then ATP production slows down. Okay, this leads to the symptoms like fatigue, memory loss, because less ATP in the brain, which leads to dementia, which is a memory loss, less energy in the body, less ATP in the body, which leads to the fatigue, less energy in the muscles leads to the muscle weakness. Okay, always. So that's why they are very important. Imagine the glucose is a rich person with a bag of money. Okay, bag of money means electrons. Imagine a glucose, it's a rich person which is holding a bag, which is full of money, and those monies, they are what? Those monies, they are electrons. Okay, and NAD plus is a courier. Okay, it's courier, and the glucose gives the money to the courier always. Okay, glucose is going to give its money to the courier, it's going to give off its electrons to the electron carrier, and NAD plus then becomes NADH. So NAD was a courier with taxi driver. Okay, then it becomes full after getting that money or electron, and it becomes NADH now, full of energy means. Okay, then NADH runs to the bank. Bank is electron transport chain, the last portion of the cellular respiration, and drops it off there. And in return, the bank gives the ATP check to that patient. Okay, so this again repeats. Okay, FAT also does this. Okay, any questions?
No, teacher. No.
So in the diabetes, for example, in the diabetes, what's happening in the diabetes? You have more glucose in the body. Okay, hyperglycemia. That means more NADH in the body, right? That means more NADH in the body. So more NADH, that means overload electron transport chain. Okay, overload electron transport chain, and it can produce the oxidative stress to the body always. Okay, so electron transport chain cannot accept the electrons. They cannot accept the electrons if the oxygen is lack. Oxygen is the final electron acceptor. So when the NADH and FADH2, they stay very full when the oxygen is deficient, which stops the ATP production in case of ischemia. Ischemia means low oxygen, okay? Ischemia in Russian. So in B2 deficiency, when riboflavin, in the case of riboflavin deficiency, in B2 deficiency, you have very less FADs. Okay, less FAD means less energy. Okay, less energy because the ATP production is really low. So what about NAD? NAD means when the B3 deficiency mostly. So deficiency of the B3 leads to the low NAD, which leads to low ATP. It causes pellagra, okay? It causes pellagra. B3 deficiency is pellagra, which combination of the three symptoms. First is dementia, then dermatitis, then diarrhea. Okay. Any questions so far?
No.
This was all about the electron carriers, as introduction to cellular respiration. Now we can go to the glycolysis process.